Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. My name is Adrian. Uh, we're on the Simplified Network Automation live stream here with the Cisco DevNet team. And today we have a special guest, Jean-Marc Barrozet. Welcome to the stream, Jean-Marc, we're going to talk about Catalyst SD-WAN SDK, right? The Ansible Collection. But before we get there, would you please introduce yourself, tell folks what you do at Cisco, what's your role, and welcome.
Sure. Thanks, Adrian. And thanks for having me on this, YouTube stream. And yeah, it's about, SD-WAN, SD routing, SDK, Python. So my name is Jean-Marc Barrozet. I'm a principal engineer. I'm part of the technical marketing team at Cisco within the enterprise networking BU. And I do mostly routing, good old routing protocols. The newer ones like the SD-WAN, the OMP, everything that is around, the Catalyst SD-WAN and SD routing. But I'm mostly doing routing, right? So you can have what I'm doing here, talking about Python and SDK, right? But in the last few years, I mean, it's interesting to see that we see more and more, API first, the fact that you want to automate. So I slowly started to look at, automation, what we can do, and working on APIs and everything. So that's what I mostly. So I split my time between, the SD-WAN foundation core and everything which is around, automation APIs.
Gotcha. Nice. So yes, we're on the same bandwagon, right? So basically, automation first these days, API first, automation first. So tell us a bit about your background, right? We like to hear here on the live stream people talk about, how did they get to where they are today? Like, how did you get to do automation? I know you have like a bit of a longer story
Yeah.
going back, but
Yes.
people are curious and interested to see,
Yeah.
how your career evolved to where you are today.
We have only 1 hour, so I try to keep it short. Um, so I've been at Cisco for 27 years, right? And
Wow.
so I joined in 1997, and I know for young people, watching that session, that it was around, try to convince customer to migrate from ATM frame relay to gigabit Ethernet. That was and then voice over IP, and then video over IP, and then everything, that. So Cisco was not a startup, but it was a small company against the giant, like, the Alcatel of the world, the IBM of the world. So that was a very funny time, and I was doing switching and routing, right? That was. I mean, and over the years, that's what I've been doing. And the funny part is, when we introduced the voice over IP, I was pretty much working against, my old company, because I was at Alcatel before, and I actually started as a software engineer, right, writing software in C++, for a product that doesn't exist anymore. Or I don't know if people are still aware of that, PBX, which was the voice stuff at Alcatel, right? And I was working on the kernel, so mostly the system. So it was C, C++, a bit of assembler, and yeah, that was my starting point. And then, we started to work with a small company called Cisco, and the idea was, hey, the PBX is the center of the universe, and we're going to, connect um, routing blades from Cisco. But the point was, PBX was at the center, and the Cisco blade was kind of attached to that and converting it to the. So that was kind of funny. And then at some point, I realized that, okay, that may not be the right approach. It's maybe the other way around. The voice running on top of IP networks.
Yeah.
I joined Cisco for mostly doing routing, and I completely forgot software for like, I don't know, 20 years maybe. Yeah, more than 20 years. So I'm kind of back. It's kind of looking back, going back into what I was doing initially, right? So I'm not, I by no means a Python expert. I'm by no means, but I know these are tools that we more and more networking guys have to use to work on, especially for large enterprise deployments, service providers as well. Automation is really key, right? That's my journey to this.
Great, great. Well, it's 27 years. Wow, I did
Yeah,
not know.
yeah.
That is impressive.
I really cannot imagine. But yeah, that's 27 years. Yes.
Wow. Well, too many more. Too many more. Um, all right. So then, Catalyst SD-WAN, right? How many years have you been on this team, Jean-Marc? On
Probably 6 years. Well, I actually before that we had a pre kind of SD-WAN solution called I1. I don't know if
Yep.
you remember, that was
Yes.
performance
Yes.
routing, DMVPN, BGP
Yeah.
over DMVPN, the good old stuff. And then we acquired Viptela. I believe it's 6 years ago, but time is flying so fast that and over the last few years, the idea was to take the Viptela software and migrate everything into iOS 16. The iOS 16 platform that partners and Cisco sales, everyone are actually familiar with that software. So yeah, and so it was mostly working on the Viptela software into the platforms and improving the vManage UI. Initially, that was really working on the UI because I'm not sure I should say that, but initially the UI was like a UI for CCIE. So meaning you look at the device template, you have all these fancy parameters, like pages and pages of parameters. I mean, very nice for people like me or like a bunch of CCIEs out there. But these days in 24, we're looking at something a little bit more easy to use, right? So
Right. All right. All right. So then, yes, folks. So we're talking about SD-WAN based on the Viptela acquisition. Catalyst SD-WAN has been recently renamed. We're not talking about Meraki SD-WAN today, right? That's also was causing a bit of confusion in the past.
yeah.
So we're talking about the Catalyst SD-WAN. All right. So the SDK, right? I mean, I know I've just come back from Cisco Live Vegas, so I've had people ask me, about the SDK. We've had sessions. Alex Young from the BU, right? He had a session. I had a workshop on the SDK. There were a lot of questions, a lot of interest from folks, right? Because, like you said, large enterprises, you've got to automate. There's just no way you're gonna go and configure tens
And
of
click, click,
thousands
click
of
everywhere. No,
devices.
you
Yeah,
can't.
no, that's
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of interest in the SDK. I know folks were mentioning Sestry, which was kind of an SDK that was not really officially supported. It was out there. Then the vManage client SDK, which also, has had a history, came out, I believe, out of CX org. And then, so people have tried to come up with their own SDKs or interpretations. But now we finally have the official one, right? So we're getting close to being ready with the GA with the SDK, right? It's in kind of EFT phase. We have customers trying it out. We've showed it. So what's the story there?
Yeah, maybe I've just a couple of slides, not to me, just to set the stage where we are. And so yeah, we within the enterprise we have a couple of platforms, the Meraki dashboard that you mentioned. the Catalyst Center, which is for the campus platforms, and then we are talking about the Catalyst SD-WAN, right? And the idea is to expose APIs so that you can consume them, with the tools that we all know, the Python, Ansible, Terraform. You pick the one that you actually prefer, right? And to your point, the idea is, if you look at Catalyst SD-WAN, I don't know how familiar are the people watching this session, but basically, you do not go directly to the device, right? You actually go and configure everything from one of the controller called SD-WAN Manager. We also renamed the controllers. Maybe you're familiar with vManage, vSmart, vBond. We decided to make it a little bit more complex by saying, vManage is the SD-WAN Manager, the vSmart is the SD-WAN controller. So that's the routing guy. And the vBond is the SD-WAN validator, which is exactly what v1 is supposed to do. But so that vManage SD-WAN Manager is where you configure everything, right? So sometimes I have questions from customers saying, hey, I want to directly push the config to the device, to the routing platforms. And this is not what we do in Catalyst SD-WAN. Everything is actually controlled by the SD-WAN Manager. So everything you have to do is with the APIs. Actually, initially we started from the UI. As I said, the idea was to simplify the UI, and then now we're working really on the APIs. And maybe I can actually go. See, can you see my screen? The SD-WAN Manager.
Yep. Can you zoom in a bit, Jean-Marc?
Zoom a bit? Yeah, I can do that. Is
there
that
you
better?
Go. Yeah, it's much better. Thank you.
So when you look at the SD-WAN Manager interface, actually everything is based on APIs, right? So let me, yes.
Right, so you can show them developer tools that you see every action you do in the GUI.
Exactly. There's
an
exactly
API
the point,
call, right? That gets triggered in the backend.
The point is everything is actually based on APIs. So say, for example, usually you have the questions. Okay, how can I actually do this that I'm doing in the UI? I'm not saying that's the right approach, but the idea is you can use the developer tools like this. You go and you say, well, let's go to something simple, devices. Why is the network?
I would should be like a
this one
/devices.
So see, exactly, vEdge. So you see that API data service, everything is under data service on the and usually people started to look at this and say, hey, this is the API that I have to use, which is okay, a way to find what you want to actually use. Now everything is available now in also in API docs, right? So if you look at your platform, all the APIs that we have, they are actually listed directly on your SD-WAN Manager instance, right? So then you can actually look at everything that you want to use, the configuration group. And as you can actually see, if I look at maybe something like this, we have I would not say all the APIs, but maybe APIs that are a bit more, all that, than the config group. You see that kind of URL that we are using compared to the config group where we introduced that, version 1. The idea is one of the challenge we had was when we change an API, like we change the parameters or we change the payload, or the schema or anything like this, we actually do that on the actual current API. So that breaks sometimes the tools that customers or partners are actually developing. So now we started last year, or maybe a bit more, a year and a half ago, to say, okay, now we're starting to introduce versioning, so that if we really want to change an API, then we change the version number. So you'll see that in all the new APIs, like the config groups, which is actually something used to configure the device, right?
Yeah, and that's mostly for backward compatibility reasons, right?
That's
like
exactly
like
for
you
that.
said, Jean-Marc, right? Because
Yeah.
you have to keep it version as you go to the next version. Make sure you're not causing breaking changes to folks that have already developed automation on top of the API.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was one of the key work on initially to clean the APIs, really adding the documentation. So basically, also if you go to developer.cisco.com, you also have all the APIs. You have the reference as well. So if you don't have an instance, but and we introduced the change log as well. So for every release, there is a change log where you can actually check what APIs are new, what APIs are actually updated, right?
Deprecated, changed, all of that.
Deprecated, changed,
Yeah.
etc. I don't know if there is one right there. What's new? So you can actually look at this. So yeah, there's a much better, cleaner, management of all the APIs that we have on that platform. Then, and it's quite major work, because I don't know if you get how many APIs we have on the system, but it's actually more than 2,000 APIs that we have to manage and update, right? So that's a bit, right? And back to your point, we actually all, I mean, not all, but a bunch of people at Cisco, they were actually trying to add a support for using the APIs instead of developing yourself. So you mentioned that we had the Python vTeller SDK, which is completely deprecated. So we removed that from the documentation. And there's a couple of tools out there. One is very common and well known, that is Sastre. And that is a tool that mostly do backup and restore. It is actually able to do much more than that. But let's say you have an instance somewhere and you want to back up and you want to maybe to restore. So that's Sastre. So, but we want to have something developed and maintained by the BU, by our BU. So that's the reason for this Catalyst WAN Python SDK. If you have to use something, start with this one, the Catalyst WAN Python SDK, right? Because that's the one we deploy, that's the one we develop, and that's the one we support. By supporting, I mean that we fix the bugs, right? But also for every new release, this is part of the solution test, right? So we test using the Catalyst WAN Python SDK.
Yeah, and this is the one we're talking about today. So that's
exactly, that's the one we're going to.
The one.
Yeah, the one. Finally, yes. And on top of that, we have Ansible collections. That's also something I'm going to show. So these are the two new developments. So the Python SDK. So mention it in EFT, yes. I'm not sure we can talk about EFT, right? Because it's available on GitHub. So you can go to GitHub and download. But we're Cisco, right? We still have, this process of EFT and GA and all that stuff. So as I said, we have more than 2,000 APIs. So the Python SDK will integrate more and more APIs moving forward. So every 2 weeks, you usually see a new version of the SDK with additional API endpoints being supported, right? And there is this one, there's a video on that on YouTube, which is the SD-WAN lab, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with CML, the Cisco modeling labs. SD-WAN lab is actually a Python script to instantiate a full SD-WAN lab on CML. So you basically get all the controllers and then a bunch of Catalyst 8000V. So you can easily, in like 15 minutes, you start a lab and you can play. And so CX people are actually using that because it's a very useful tool. Right? So maybe, so now we have the APIs. The idea is, so what can we do with these APIs? So maybe it's a bit too small, right?
Yeah, can you again zoom in a couple of times, please?
Like
That's
this.
better. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm starting, like I want to use an API. I have no SDK. I have nothing. Right? So how can I actually do that? So the first part is actually to get the parameters, right? So nothing magic. I have some environment, variables where you actually have the IP address of the. I still call that vManager. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to do SD-WAN manager, but so
old
the vManager,
habits die hard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So you have the vManager host, the port, the username and password, right? So when you look at this, the first, and that's actually what we have on the DevNet page, on the documentation page, you have to authenticate, right? So you have to log into vManager, give your username and password, you get a JSession ID, so you get, a cookie. You make sure you have that cookie, and then if not, if yes, then you actually get the token, which is an additional token that is used to authenticate to the vManager. What I'm trying to say is you have to know that first, and then two, we may change to provide an additional authentication method like OAuth or something like this, right? So that means if we change the authentication, then you will have to change that code as well, right? But for the time being, that's what we have. And then I've added a couple of comments. Just I'm going up. Where is this? Let's look at maybe this one. So that say you want to have the list of devices, right? So first of all, you have to know the endpoint, the API endpoint, right? So you have to know this is system device. And this is where, if you remember, when I showed the developer tools, that's exactly the URL that was actually used, right? So you have to know, right, somehow what is the API endpoint. And we usually have questions around, hey, I want to do that. What is the API that I have to use, right? And then you go and use the request. I mean, nothing magic, right? You use the request module. You get a response. And then you have to, what you actually get is a JSON payload, right? So you have to parse the JSON payload. And actually, I write that payload into a file so we can have a look. And then you actually go into that payload and you have to know the key values so that you can get the actual values and then display that. So if I, right. Nice. Oh. So that's what you get, right? You get, so that's, I know that as part of the payload, so that payload is right there. So as you can see, the payload is something you have to parse. Nothing, I mean, in Python, it's pretty easy, but you basically have two parts. One is the header, which is really something that is used by the UI, right? And you see the columns and everything. This is what you actually, if you look at the title of, and if I go back to the UI,
a list of devices, right?
Yeah. So if you look at this, look at the title. That's exactly the title that you see in the payload, right? So that's what, initially the APIs, they were actually developed for the user interface, right? So that's, I mean, when you look at the payload, you see that pretty clearly. And then if you go down, you have the data, right? Right there.
Starting there, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and that's basically, you have all the data. So for every VH, for every, so I'm using Catalyst 8000V in that case. So you get, I have 2 of them, and you get the details of, all the parameters. But that means you have to parse everything, right? And if you look at the code, this is where, the item, where is my item? Yeah, you see, I'm actually parsing the response, and I only get the data part. I don't care about the headers because it's for the UI, right? So then I'm able to do that, right? So basically, what I'm trying to say is we are using the basic, request module. You have to authenticate to vManage. You get the JSON payload. You have to parse the JSON response, which is okay, but that's maybe not what you actually want to do, right?
It's a lot of manual work. You're basically building everything
exactly
from scratch. You build the headers. You have to get the token. You have to build the cross.
and sometimes
header, right? So yeah.
And this, I mean, I remember we had a kind of, I cannot find it, yeah. But every key that you have right there, if we change something, then you have to, look at your code again and update your code, right? So that's where we are. If you don't have the SDK. So now if I look at the SDK, and that SDK is actually, if I go there,
it's on GitHub, right? So it's publicly
it's on
available.
GitHub, exactly.
You can also
If
install it
you
with
search for
install.
Catalyst WAN SDK, you get that, right? And you also have that available, obviously, on the Python registry. So that's where we are. That's the latest version. And you just have to pip install Catalyst WAN, and you're good to go. So, and what you actually have to understand is it's kind of a layered approach. The layer 1 is kind of a superset of the request module that I just shown. So, but what you get is what you call a manager session, meaning that we provide all the authentication in the background. You just call that class with all the functions, and then what you actually get the authentication done. And then you can do the session.get, and I'm going to show that. You do not get really more than that. So basically, when you do the request, there is nothing that we do except creating that session, authenticating to vManage, getting everything done, and then you can do the request, the post, or the get. And what you actually get in response is the JSON, right? So you end up having to do pretty much the same. So if I go back to that's why I call raw, but I take the same device. So in that case, I've actually created a module called create session, which is this one. So I'm doing the check on the parameters, and everything I have. I mean, the only task I have to do is call that create manager session. So that is the main function from the Python SDK, because then you get you just give the parameters, and based on that, then you get an object, and you as you can see, there's a couple of parameters that you get with that. When you have that session object, then you can actually go and use that to call and do a session.get. Very similar to what we do with the request module, but this time it's actually you don't care about the authentication, but you still have to know the API
endpoints, right? Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's one example where say you have a specific endpoint and it's not supported by the Python SDK. because again, we have 2,000, more than 2,000 APIs. So maybe some of them are not supported today, right? So we're making progress, but still, if that's the case, then you can still use that. The API endpoint. You provide that. You call the session.get, and then you actually do exactly what we do. So in that case, I'm saving the payload, and that's it, right? So that's exactly the same mechanism, but I'm using the SDK, so I don't have to care about the authentication, right? So in that case, if I go to so I'm doing exactly the same. I'm saving the payload, right? So I'm saving the payload in this stuff. So I'm having exactly the same payload, right? No magic, right? And that's because actually I dumped the entire payload. So if I want to just have the data, then I'm doing. I can actually do that, right? And dump the items right there. If I do that again. Go to the.
Go in the output.
Made a mistake, I guess. See. And,
JSON dump items.
Should start again. Maybe. All right, let's see. What I'm doing wrong there. Well, anyway, that's not the most important part. So that's basically the same as the request.
Mm-hmm. It just does the authentication for you, basically. So
but
that's
you get the authentication. That's
yeah.
the point. Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this. So then you actually go and use the endpoints, right? So when you use the endpoints, it's kind of a one-to-one mapping to the API endpoints. The URL that you have on the system.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do that, you actually go and actually use the data model that we have in the SDK. So you basically, instead of just getting the JSON response, you get an object. So you get an object for the template, for the device, for the tenants, for everything that we have on the vManage interface, and you basically get that as a list of, we call it data sequence. That means, if it's a list of devices, then you get a list of devices objects. If you look at the list of, if you want to get the list of config groups, then you get a list of config group objects, right? So but it's really a one-to-one mapping, right? There's no real logic more than that. We know the API endpoint. We get the object, and then you have the parameters, right? So basically, if I look at the endpoints, so I'm going again the devices, for example. In that case, let me go up. So as you can see, so I'm still creating my session. So that's my main object, right? And then as you know, you have your object. So you can actually start saying, hey, I want to look at what I have. So you do session endpoints, and then you have the help. So you see everything that you actually get from that. There's quite a lot, right? So for example, I want to actually use I want to get the all devices that I have. So that's the one object, which is the configuration device inventory, right? And when you get that, then you can get all the details, right? And you have the help. So if you go and hop over the function, then you say, okay, I can actually provide the category, and so you can have the list of all devices that are edge devices, right? And then when you get that, then you loop into the that's what I call, the list of the data sequence. It's a list of device objects, right? And these objects, they have a list of parameters, right? So in that case, I want the UID, I want the device type, I want the host name, and I mean, you define what you actually want, right? So it's again, you get the help. So for example, you want something more than that. Say
item dot and automatically
and
shows you, right?
and you show
Pre-populated
exactly.
for you. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's much easier to write code instead of trying to figure out the payload, what are the options, parsing it, extracting it. I'm just doing item dot automatically.
Yeah, and you still have to kind of make a guess, right? What should I? But it's pretty easy to actually look at the proposal and see, okay, that's what I want actually to use. And then you can filter, you can look at the controllers, you can look at the managers by filtering and providing, the type of devices that you actually want to have. So that's what I'm doing. I'm looking at the device inventory, and now I want to get the details for the controllers. So that's all the vManage nodes. The vSmart nodes. All the managers, that's all the vManage nodes, all the validators, so that's all the vBond and then all the vSmarts, right? So, and then you loop, again, you get the data sequence, which is a list of manager object, validator object, and controller objects. And then you can display them. Now, maybe actually you want to have all devices actually used, right? The one that, the routing platforms that not the inventory, not all the controllers on the edge devices, but just the devices that are actually used. So it's again an endpoint, and then you look at the monitoring details. It's monitoring function, and you want to get the list of all devices. And again, I mean, you loop into the list of devices, and then you have the help to guide you and with all the parameters, right? If I do that, this is device
endpoints.
You have to change to endpoints. So that's we get the session information, right? What I showed before. You get the edge device inventory, the controller inventory, and then the devices that are actually used, right? So I mean, this is so the first part is kind of everything that you have defined in your system. Like, because you can have a bunch of devices that are not actually in the overlay, right? You say, I don't want to go into the details of the PNP portal, but you have to define all the devices you want to use in your system, in your overlay. vManage will actually sync up from the PNP portal, so you get the list of all devices that you want to use. But and the second part is the devices that are in the overlay connected, right? A UID, that's not a UID. Oh, device ID.
You're getting device ID.
It's not the wrong one. That's a good example to say, okay, these are everything that I can get.
And this comes with every regular ID, right? I mean, you're showing here Visual Studio Code, but PyCharm.
Yeah, no, I'm using VS Code. You can use, PyCharm. You can use, NeoVim. whatever, you get exactly the same, right? So
Yeah.
so let's see, that should be better. And obviously, it's much easier, to do
Change
that.
something, right? Exactly.
Yeah,
In
no,
the UID.
it's two lines, right? You loop into the devices and you get the parameters and done, right? So very easy, right?
I like to say that code it writes by itself in this case, right? It's
Yeah,
like so much more smoother. The interaction, like item dot. Okay, what are my options? Just select it, move on.
yeah, absolutely, yes. So that's the endpoint.
Mhm.
And then finally on top you have we call that the API, user friendly. It's actually endpoint, or it's already user friendly. But the point of the APIs, it's more high level approach, where you have APIs that they may call multiple vManage APIs at the end, right, in the background.
So it's like a
So the idea,
whole workflow, right? Like a
it's
whole
kind of, it
workflow
could be a
exposed
workflow.
over an
Yeah,
API. Yeah.
right. And so it, ideally, we should use the APIs, right?
Mhm.
But because we developed over time, and so we have endpoints that are defined, and now we have APIs. So sometimes you can actually use both. Like for the list of devices, I use that example because it's actually one that is pretty common, right? And easy to get.
Mhm.
So you have an endpoint to get the list of devices, exactly what I showed, but you also have an API, a layer 3, kind of call. So if I go to the endpoint, so I have a couple of them. Say, so let's start again with the devices. So again, you create your session. In that case, so this is session.api, right?
Mhm.
And you can see it's the API container, and then within that container, there's a couple of object that you can get. Devices is one, and then you again you have the help, right? So if I hop over this one, then you get the help. You also have a couple of examples how to use that. Right? So it's actually it's kind of easy to do. So in that case, I'm looking at the number of devices that I have that are actually edge devices. Then I list all the devices. So again, I loop into the list of objects, right? And you get the same help, right? So when you type dev dot, you have all the parameters that you actually can get from that object. Pretty much, the same that we had with the endpoints, right? As I said, you can filter. So I want on the vSmart. So I just put the personality.vsmart, and I get that, and then I loop into the vSmart, and again I can display the vSmarts. I can filter. Say I want to actually look at a specific edge device, and I want to look at the CPU usage. So I take all the devices, the list of devices. I filter based on the name, the
Mhm.
host name, and then I get the CPU load, right? And this is what I'm going to display. Now, maybe you want to look at the health of the device, not just the CPU.
Mhm.
So in that case, you go. It's different, object. You look at the dashboard, which is exactly, if I go back to my review, this is the dashboard, right? The monitoring
Mhm.
dashboard. So I can actually do the same and look at the health of my devices, right? And then you can also look at the total health. So these are a couple.
Mhm.
So you can explore and look at this.
Device API. Yeah, so this would be, it's interesting that you have it in 3 levels. Usually, from what I've seen, SDKs go either one or the other. It's rare to see, right, an SDK that
Yeah,
has all the 3 levels. I mean, which options you want? You want like the workflow API, user friendly, software upgrades, backups, restores.
yeah.
that require multiple API endpoints in the backend, or
Exactly.
you just want the API endpoints exposed, we give you that too. Or if the API endpoint is not exposed yet, it will be, in the next version, but you can go and build it manually with requests like you used to before.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. I mean, so, so that's the result, of the all the devices, all the controllers. I look at the edge, with just the CPU, the device health. So you have a summary. It's exactly that, the same
Showing in
as
the
this,
dashboard.
Yeah, exactly. And then the tunnel health is the exact equivalent of this, right? So that's what you get. So I've only 2 tunnels, so it's easy, but you get the idea. So to your point, if you look at the, say, where is my software upgrade? Oh, right there. So software upgrade is actually a, did I do that? No, I did. So no, this one is just to activate. But typically, software upgrade is a good example of a user-friendly call where in the backend you have multiple APIs because you have to upload the software, you have to download the software on the platforms, you have to make sure the device has rebooted, you have to activate the device and everything. So, for example, there's a bunch of functions like this where you wait and then you get the results of your function. So it's that's kind of the idea, and we're also working on way more advanced APIs like or SDK calls like migration, for example. So there is a function that you can actually use to migrate a set of controllers from a multi-tenant instance into a single tenant instance, right? And that's one example. We're also working on the migration from UX 1.0 for people familiar with SD-WAN. That is the use of device templates, feature templates. We're migrating from that into the new one, the UX 2.0, where we actually use the config groups, the profiles, and the parcels. So that's much more complex function that we're going to provide, right? And talking about the config group, you can also get the list of config groups, for example. So the very same way you type session.api, you have the help config group, and then you get all the config groups. So you loop into the config groups, and as part of the config groups, so if I look at this configuration groups, say I'm going to modify this one. So a config group like this one is based on profiles. So for now, we have 3 main profiles. The system profile, it's all about host name, NTP server, DNS server, system IP, all this, kind of global stuff. The transport, which is everything for the transport interface, like the VPN 0, the physical interface, the tunnel description, the color name and everything. And then the service profile, which is everything on the LAN side. That means the VRF or the VPNs and everything, that to help you connect users into your device. So these are, the main the main stuff. And then within the profiles, what you actually see is you have parcels, right? So it's kind of a hierarchical kind of config where you have on top the config groups, then the profiles, then the parcels. When you look at this, you can actually get everything from there. Like you get the config groups, and then you get a list of profiles, right? And then you loop into the profiles to actually display the profile, the name. So I just get just a few parameters there, right? And so if I use that,
So that's a big move and a breaking change, I believe, right, Jean-Marc, moving from UX 1.0 with device templates to config
Yeah,
groups in UX 2.0. Because I mean, you have to pretty much reconfigure your whole
that is
SD-WAN
correct.
fabric.
Yes.
And then, so the SDK, is that the only way that you can kind of automate that move
Um,
and
I would
migration? I mean, you would
I
have
would
to do it
say
manually, no? If not, you would have to go on the
right.
manager and kind of map your device
Yes.
template, your config group, right? So you
Yeah,
have to do
it's
it that way.
there's one way, which is to start from scratch, and you create a config group and you try to map, what you had into this one. And yeah, the SDK is going to be the first real option to actually automate the process
Hmm.
and migrate from UX 1.0 to UX 2.0. Are we going to do more than that? I'm not sure.
Time
um,
will tell.
time will tell. Yeah, maybe that's something we can provide directly inside the SD-WAN manager interface. Maybe. I guess it's probably faster to have that in the SDK, in my opinion, because
Hmm.
we are not following the vManage release process where you have to wait every quarter to get a new release. With the SDK, you get a new release every 2 weeks. So it's actually much faster and much more flexible, in my opinion. But I'm not the product manager, so maybe they will decide in a slightly different way, right? So yeah, that's kind of the way you do that. Now, I don't want to go deep into that config group because it can become very complex. So I have two config groups, and you can see the three profiles: the
Hmm.
service profile, the transport, and the system profile. One is for SD-WAN, and one is for SD routing, because we also have SD routing in vManage. Right? You can support an edge device that is not an SD-WAN device, that is just a plain, iOS XE platform connected to vManage. Right? That is something we now support in vManage as well. Right. So if I look at, for example, the users, same. You create the session, then API.users, and you get the list of users. Again, when you loop into the list of object, then you get the parameters, your username, group, and resource group. And you can also obviously create a new user, right? Say you want to use, I don't know, I can't remember how many tests I have in my system, but and let's try this one.
And it's just that easy to create a new user, right?
Yeah, that is.
API.users, very straightforward.
So you get the list. So that's what we have right
Mhm.
now. We have admin. We have my name, and then the test. Or there's one. So let's maybe remove this one because I don't want to create
So then
All right.
that's
Yeah,
the
that's the
SDK, right, Jean-Marc? So tell us a bit now. We're getting close to the end here about
so now
Ansible. So how is that?
we have the Ansible. So basically, when you have that SDK, then we provide two Ansible collections. Right? One is something used to deploy the controllers on AWS for now, and we're going to support Azure and GCP in the future. We can also deploy Catalyst 8000V on AWS. We onboard the device, so we provide, the bootstrap config, the day zero config, and everything is connected. So that's what I'm using to quickly spin up a lab, like exactly this one. So you just use that, and you easily deploy the number of devices you want. And then the other one, which is this one, the collection, Catalyst one. This is more software functions. You have your controllers, you have your overlay that is set up. Now you want to perform some actions. you want to do some health checks, you want to onboard new edges, you want to remove, you want to do software upgrades. Sorry. And then, so everything that that you actually have in the SDK will be exposed with an Ansible, within that Ansible collection, right? And so, and then these two are actually under this Ansible collection SD-WAN. So you actually clone this one. You install, from the Galaxy the two collections, and then you can use them, right? So I have to move to this one.
And then we have a comment here, Shabin Saji thinks that Ansible is not that flexible. Shabin, what do you mean by that? Why do you think it's not flexible? And what other tool are you using then if not Ansible?
Yeah, I guess,
So for this, Jean-Marc, you just Galaxy install Ansible collection SD-WAN, and that collection contains both of deployment and Catalyst WAN, right?
You actually you have to install and not this one. So and then you using Ansible Galaxy, you install the this one and this one, these two, right? So you clone that one. That's kind of the playground for you, so you can modify what we provide, and you have to install these two collections, and then you actually use both to build your workflow, right? The very first workflow that we actually provide is full deploy and configure, right? So this is where you have so we're using a config file, and then we are using roles. Right? So these are the two ones. So you basically create all the subnets, the VPC, the security groups, everything you need on AWS or Azure. When it's done, then you instantiate the controllers, right? So if I go to the
So these playbooks that you were showing, are they publicly available? Are they like somewhere on GitHub that folks can download?
Okay. Exactly. Yeah, GitHub. So if you look at the collection SD-WAN deployment, which is the first one to deploy the controllers and the Catalyst 8000V, you look at the roles, this is what you get, right? So you have AWS and Azure, right? So that's the first one for deployment, and the other one is this one. And again, this is on GitHub, right? And on Ansible Galaxy as well. And if you look at the roles, then you have not everything, right? So this is a brand new collection, and we have that. You can sync, from the PNP portal. You can change the vManage mode. You can do some health checks. You can set up some settings, activate, the routing platforms, etc. Right? And moving forward, we are going to provide more than that, right? And the one that you want to download is the main one, which is this one. So you have to clone this one, right? And then you have a bunch of playbooks there. One for AWS. The one is full deploy. And right, so that's what I have right now. So I've made so typically we deploy, so we create the network and deploy the controllers. I've used that to actually instantiate my controllers, right? Then you actually wait for the vManage to be ready to answer the API. That takes quite a while because we have to instantiate the VM. Then it takes quite a while, like more than 25 minutes, I believe. And then when it's ready, then you start configuring all the settings, and you onboard all the controllers. By that I mean you add the vSmart, you add the vBond to vManage. Then from there you sync the PNP. You sync all the devices from the PNP portal. Right? When you deploy an SD-WAN, you buy your routing platforms. It's in a PNP portal automatically. And the system will actually sync using your credentials and get that in the vManage. and then we deploy the edge devices, right? And then when it's deployed, we activate them. So as you can see, there's this long workflow that you have. A much simpler one is maybe I've done just this one. I'm using the config. If I look at the config, that's kind of something like this. You have to give your org name, which is the org name of the overlay, your region, your password, right? Your AMI ID. So you need to have an AMI for the controllers. That is something you get from Cisco. So you have to ask for that. It's not freely available, right?
Oh, I see. So it's not on the marketplace, on the AWS marketplace?
No, it's not. No,
Oh,
it's not.
okay.
So you have to. I believe the process is to open a case and ask for the AMI for say 2014 release, and then they will actually provide you with the AMI for the vSmart, vBond, and vManage.
I see.
So
then
you have
coverage on Ansible, like how percentage-wise, how much coverage do you have on the APIs? Is like, does it cover everything, the collection?
No,
Is it,
no, it's very minimum for now. Really,
Okay.
I mean, look at the if I look at the roles. Let me go back to say deployment. Deployment is okay. There's AWS on Azure. We will have to provide GCP as well, but it's this one is pretty much I would not say complete, but you can really instantiate all the controllers very easily. You can instantiate Catalyst 8000V in some VPCs very easily, activate them. The one that is more, I would say, where's my repo? This is more the software functions. If you look at the roles that we provide, see, this is what we have. Compared to 2,000 APIs, no, we are not yet there, right? We are not yet there. It's a subset, but the idea is we will provide more moving forward for sure. The hope is also that while we started as Cisco, engineering, team, we started to provide that the Python SDK, the Ansible collection. The hope is maybe we'll get some partners or maybe even customers helping and providing, feedback and asking for functions and stuff like this, right? I mean, that's my hope, that we can actually get a community of people, working on this. If I look at what we have from ACI, the ACI team, that's what they have. They started like, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe more than that. But now they have a community. So they are, Cisco people working on the SDK. It's just a subset of the entire community, right? So the hope is maybe to get it as well.
I see. So then, do you accept pull requests on this repos?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
do?
absolutely.
Okay.
You can go to pull. So for now, it's mostly coming from Cisco guys, but yeah, I mean, if you can open issues, you can open pull request. I mean, they are more than welcome. Actually, even same for the SDK, right? If you go to the SDK contributing, that tells you how to contribute, what you have to do. There's some code guidelines that you have to use a bunch of tools to make sure your Python code is okay. Well, yeah, that's and yeah. And so if you want to look at what is actually supported, you go to this endpoints and you get the list of API that are actually supported. There's quite a lot, right?
And they get added more on a bi-weekly basis, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you look at the this where is the release? You see the
yeah, it's very active.
Yes,
it's actively being worked on for sure. All right, we're a bit over the hour. Jean-Marc, thank you so much. So then we'll share links with you folks for pretty much everything that Jean-Marc was showing you, right? The Ansible, both. And then let me just Disable. Okay, so screen sharing stop. We'll share the links on both YouTube and LinkedIn, right? To the SDK, to the Ansible collection. You can check it out, and then please contribute, right? We welcome contributions. We want to build a community around these. Dexter, King, thank you for joining us. And next week, we're not going to actually have a streaming session. We are going through a shutdown at Cisco that week. The following week, I'm on vacation.
Cisco, yeah, US
yes.
people shut down. Yes.
Yes.
we are not in EMEA, right? So.
No, I think people have to take time off, and
that's for sure. Yes.
They have to. So we're taking time off next week for sure, and I'll see you folks about middle of July. We'll come back. We'll have a bunch of new sessions for July, and then August and September. I already have the schedule. Folks have signed up for this, so we'll see you on the next one. Jean-Marc, thank you so much. Any final words from you before we wrap up?
No, I guess feedback highly welcome. Please try, provide feedback. I mean, we're not yet there, right? It's a
work in
progress.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So with that said, thank you so much. Take care, everyone, and see you on the next one. Bye.